Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Every day feels like it's morphing into one, but apart from that, I'm healthy. And thanks very much for agreeing to do this. I won't keep you too long. It's only, I think, the whole premise of me trying to do this is that social media is going a bit crazy at the moment, and I want to fight back against it in some way. And even though I can provide some form of information, it's always better to speak to people that actually do it for a living, rather than me, who, even though I am an immunologist, it's not. I'm primarily focused on neurodegenerative disease rather than virology and that side of things. So, just to start off with, I think the best thing for me to ask for this would be like, could you give an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Craig Wilen. I'm a physician scientist and assistant professor at Yale University. I'm in the departments of laboratory medicine and immunobiology, and my lab is focused on understanding how SARS-CoV-2 interacts with the host to cause disease and looking at potential drug targets and mechanisms of immunity and immune evasion.
So, some of the most common questions that have kind of come up that I've seen around the internet sphere, as it were, is relation, of course, to the new variants, and what that might mean in terms of, one, the vaccines themselves, but also what does that mean in terms of like our immune response to these new variants. For example, in the US, you have the UK variant, which has now come over here and kind of spread everywhere. What might that mean in terms of, just generally in terms of viral infections, in terms of their, I guess, how infectious they become or their virulence, and also the symptoms, but also specifically in terms of COVID, what will these variants mean in terms of their infection going forward?
Sure. So SARS-CoV-2 as an RNA virus, just like all RNA viruses, mutates quite a bit. So every time the virus replicates, there will be new mutations resulting in new variants. This is not unexpected, and it's not unique to SARS-CoV-2. And in fact, coronaviruses probably mutate less often than other RNA viruses because they have what's called proofreading activity. But nonetheless, there's going to be, when you have millions of people infected, there's going to be many, 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 many variants, and we're probably only sampling a small subset of them because we're probably sequencing less than 1% of viruses that are circulating. But nonetheless, the emergence of variants is not unexpected. What's interesting is that it seems that there are probably several variants that have an association with slightly increased transmissibility, and the data looks like maybe it's a 50% increase in transmissibility, which is significant, but it's not crazy. It doesn't totally change what we do. I think the important things to consider are, number one, just because it's more transmissible doesn't mean it's more pathogenic. So it's not more likely to cause severe disease or kill you. It just means you may be more likely to get it. And I think that's a really important thing, that the virus is not becoming more deadly. If anything, in kind of the history of virology or viruses, the more a virus circulates, the virus actually wants to become weakened or attenuated. It doesn't want to infect, doesn't want to really cause bad disease, because dead people don't transmit as well as living people. So we don't have evidence that any of these variants are really making people sicker, but they're transmitting better. What's important also is that the measures that we've put in place, so masking, social distancing, minimizing time indoors, they work on the earlier variants and these other variants. So we have to do the same things. Maybe we have to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more vigilant, but we know what to do. We know how to handle it. If a variant was to emerge that became more pathogenic, that would be more concerning and would warrant potentially additional preventative measures. Probably the most important thing is will these variants be able to escape the immune response from people who either were vaccinated or people who previously had infection with a previous variant. And I think the best evidence is that you'll probably be protected. They may be slightly different in terms of their susceptibility to the immune response, but minimally. So I think we don't really have evidence now that any of the new variants would be resistant to the current vaccines. Yet it's very likely at some point that this may happen, right? You have more and more people who are vaccinated and protected. So this really exerts a selective pressure on the virus, which may, select for resistant variants. But the nice thing is we're looking at this. We know we have tests and assays to measure this, and companies, I think even Moderna and Pfizer are probably they're a step ahead, and they can look at the variants and they can pretty quickly make a new mRNA vaccine to these new variants if they become an issue.
So just kind of dovetailing off that a little bit, in terms of even if something is more contagious, just because it's not more dangerous doesn't necessarily mean there won't be an increased risk, because if more people are getting it, then there'll be more, just by number of people getting infected, there'll be more people with serious complications, more people will need hospital beds, and if they aren't there, then that's where those extra deaths could actually arise from anyway.
Yeah, totally. So from a societal perspective, you're looking at the total number of deaths and the burden on the population. It could be worse by increased spread of viruses that are equally pathogenic, or it could be from similar spread, but the virus becomes more deadly in itself. Either of those things are bad. I think we know now, the evidence suggests that we may have increased spread, but not increased pathogenesis, which on the societal level is bad. But for the individual who gets a positive test, the result of that positive test shouldn't scare them any more now than it would 2 months ago.
And then just a final part in terms of adjusting vaccines and things, I guess because these vaccines are RNA vaccines, I'd imagine that the companies could therefore switch the sequences of the vaccines to match the new variants. So in theory, again, not my area of expertise by any stretch, but I'd imagine that making those amendments would be quite quick in comparison to the initial development of the first lot of vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of the reason that it was so easy, or not easy, but quick to develop mRNA vaccines initially, able to really making new things that have never been seen before. So it would be quick for, Moderna or Pfizer to make a new mRNA vaccine based upon new sequence. Much easier than if you're trying to make, a live attenuated virus, for instance.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, my final question then is a little bit, it's still associated with it, but a little bit left field in comparison to this, is there have been many papers published and many news reports saying that there are many pre-existing conditions which increase your risk of developing some form of severe viral reaction or complication, two of those being obesity and type 2 diabetes. Can you explain why, potentially maybe in relation to the immune response, why those are interlinked to those severe reactions?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question. So, obesity is a really strong risk factor for severe disease in all age groups. The short answer is we don't know why. I think there are a few possibilities. One possibility is that when you're obese, it actually changes the physical structure of your airway. You can't kind of expand your lungs as much because you have all the mass on your chest. Maybe there's something about, the structure of your upper airway as well. The other possibility is obesity is associated with inflammation. So maybe, there's more inflammation in the lungs of someone with obesity, and that predisposes them to kind of a hyperinflammatory response to the virus, which causes disease. And then the other possibility is that maybe obesity leads to, upregulation of a proviral molecule, such as the receptor ACE2, or even changes expression of an antiviral molecule or an antiviral immune response. We don't know. It could be a combination of these factors within an individual. It could be that within different people. It is one of the big mysteries of this disease. Why these comorbidities have such a really profound difference. For this virus, which isn't necessarily seen with other respiratory viruses.
Yeah, I'm interested in regards to for example, from a genetic standpoint. So for me, my PhD, I was looking at the role of inflammation in Alzheimer's and things like that, and how different genetic variants can potentially be associated with risk factors for that. I'm quite interested in that. Are there different genetic variants which predispose you to a severe inflammatory response in, for example, this scenario? And research into that into the future would be quite fascinating from my personal point of view, to see whether there are differences based on those differences in genetic makeup.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think there are a couple examples that come to mind. So one is that John Laurent Casanova's group has shown that there's inborn errors of type 1 interferon that actually correlate with disease severity. These are a relatively rare population of people, but that does link host genetics to disease severity for COVID-19. The other interesting group of people is actually people with Down syndrome. So these people have an extra copy of chromosome 21, so they clearly have differences in gene expression of many genes. And they're, by some reports, 10 times more likely to get severe disease. It's hard to disentangle, that extra, that chromosome, different structures, the airway and the neck and the anatomy, but it's definitely possible that some of the genetics is directly underlying their heightened susceptibility to disease.
Wow, that's really interesting. That I'll have to try and find some of those papers, because it's just, there's been so much of it coming out. Just hard to pick out the things that seem the most interesting or moving things forward.
If you're interested in the Down syndrome, there's a nice 2 or 3 page commentary in Science, I think from beginning of January.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate for you to spend a little bit of time to discuss this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're doing this. There's 10 million more of you.
That's the thing. It's just, I wish it was, and then I got so fed up with it. I guess I'm just, I feel like we scientists can get a bit lazy with public outreach. I feel like we can come out of the lab and we're tired from all of that, and then forget about. There's this discommunication between the public and the science is going on, and I think, unfortunately, it's always vaccines and things where it starts to stimulate again, which is a frustrating thing, but it seems inevitable at the moment. But so yes, thank you very much. I'll let you know when I put it up. It'll probably be there sometime next week. But have a great weekend, and I maybe speak to you soon.
Yeah, of course. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.